Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am your host, Deb Philman, and today I have Jon O'Brien with me to talk about the law as far as CRT in the schoolhouse. I'm going to let Jon introduce himself, but before we get started, let me just take care of the usual housekeeping issues. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Please hit the like button and share this out to anyone who would be interested in practical tips for dealing with CRT in the school. And I hope you will stick around and subscribe to the channel because I do produce content related to education every week, lots of live shows with guests like Jon. And I also have a locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com, which I hope you'll consider joining, where we talk about these things in depth. And if you need help with homeschooling, I can help you with that as well. So welcome, Jon. Welcome to The Reason We Learn, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm a regular of your show.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow,
I am.
I'm flattered. Thank you.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell the audience who may not know, some of them I imagine do know who you are, but tell us about yourself and how you came to this CRT fight thing.
I had never heard of critical race theory until Rufo put it into the mainstream, and I was just I heard a new language and also a new highly racialized way of seeing the world over the summer. And it struck me as patently illegal when implemented institutionally, particularly as it relates to school. I was representing schools at the time as an insurance defense attorney. I was representing charter schools in addition to other public institutions and private institutions in New York City. Actually, the charter school I ultimately ended up suing for Gabrielle Clark. I believe I represented in the past, and for slip and falls and like playground fights and stuff like that. And I also applied for a job there to be their in-house counsel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty ironic that I ended up suing them.
Yeah, I'll say.
But anyway, so I brought a case out in Nevada, and in the autumn of last year, I guess it was, and it turned out to be the first CRT suit. And very sympathetic clients, Gabrielle and her brave silent son. And Gabrielle had all the materials and already had a very good line of correspondence with the school that implicated them further than the course materials did themselves. So the case, the strongest claim is the compelled speech claim, which is an envious claim to bring for an attorney and a First Amendment attorney, compelled speech. And there's never been a compelled speech win against a public school ever, unless you want to count Barnett in 1943.
Mm-hmm.
So if Gabrielle and her son end up winning on that claim, that's going to be a big deal. And I'm
sorry to interrupt you, but could you explain to people watching, in this particular instance, what constituted the compelled speech in your opinion, of course? And I've read the documents, but just in case others haven't.
Well, the paradox about bringing a compelled speech claim against a school is a school instruction is all compelled speech. Take the test, sign your name. What's the capital of France? That's all compelled speech. So when is a school not allowed to compel speech? That's the question. and it's not allowed to compel speech if it's asking students to affirm beliefs that they do not agree with, and if that exercise serves no pedagogical purpose and doesn't serve a compelling interest. And so the questions William was being asked to answer for a grade, the judge indicated at a hearing in February, served no pedagogical purpose beyond indoctrination, which was his words. And William was being asked to first state his identities, his various identities, in a non-private setting of a classroom, and then label those identities as oppressor and privileged. And
so that's, not just compelled speech, but compelled speech that is sort of self-incriminating. I mean, like, you're not saying nice things about yourself in that situation either.
right, and compelling students to degrade themselves verbally and attest to collective or individual guilt about things they're not responsible for. That's harassment. So not only do you have a compelled speech claim, but you have a racial and sexual harassment claim if the school is asking you to denigrate your race or your sexuality. And this and then you can pull a violation of privacy out of that, because without a compelling state interest and without a legitimate pedagogical purpose, there's no reason to ask kids to reveal their various identities, gender, sexual, religious, in a classroom. Sometimes there are, but not in William's case. So from those repeated exercises he was asked to undergo, which are typical, by the way, of curriculum nationally, we were able to derive a lot of claims out of that.
So
Constitutional claims.
When you say it's typical nationally, you mean in terms of the critical race pedagogy that's going around today? These types of things?
Yes. Now the schools are getting, and the schools and their lawyers and the charlatans who write the material for money, they have lawyers and they're getting wiser. So I think the exercises aren't as brazen as they used to be. That's my guess.
Okay.
And that's also what I'm seeing. And so the schools are making all sorts of efforts to make these exercises optional. But that's a whole, that just because the assignment says optional, that doesn't mean it's optional, because and that's there's a whole inquiry about that. And given the age of the student, everything could be mandatory. A kindergartner is not going to be able to say no to anything the teacher asks them to do.
Right.
Also, there's all sorts of coercive pressures, like peer pressure inside of a classroom, that can render any optional disclaimer null and void, and a court will still say, you know what, the kid was under pressure to answer these questions, even though you said it was optional. So there's a whole inquiry for that.
Right, because the power differential is so obvious, and it would be sort of similar to saying, "Well, my employee didn't have to go out for drinks with me. It was optional. I was just asking them to, right?" But if that's a pattern, you start to realize, like, I'm not getting assignments, or I'm getting the garbage deals or whatever, that it's sort of implied, right? Similar with the student. If you start feeling like your grade isn't, at risk or whatever, then is it really optional?
Well,
you
yeah,
know?
and then also, I mean, if it's racist, does it even matter if it's optional? What if there's optional cross burning?
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
you know, yeah, that probably shouldn't still be going on. And
it's a good
so,
point.
optional public professions of collective guilt in the classroom, optional labeling yourself as an oppressor or privileged, probably shouldn't be going on either way.
Mhm. Probably not.
So,
Yeah,
again, if the school says it was optional, if the assignment says it was optional, don't assume your case went away.
right. What do you think about privilege walks? Have you seen those? Where they have the kids line up and then they ask these
Yeah.
questions and stuff
So
like that?
the first person who brings a privilege loss case is going to be famous. They're going to be on Tucker in 20 minutes, and they're likely going to make a lot of progress on their case. Um, and so Kimmy Herman brought a case on the employment side of things where privilege walks apparently were going on with teachers.
Mhm.
So if anyone can catch one involving a student, that's going to be a big deal. I was at a parent meeting. I go to parent meetings all the time. They're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun, and you hear a lot of horror stories and a lot of stuff that doesn't make it to Twitter that but probably should.
Right.
And a mother told me about this going on in the fifth grade, and she wanted to know if it was illegal. That was the
5th
question.
grade, privilege walk.
Fifth grade math class. How do you like that?
Yeah, I mean, my daughter had to do one, I think it was 6th or 7th grade, and that was bad enough, and I didn't find out about it till weeks later. I was like, "You did what?" Like, so it was and then I could never quite pin down anybody on whether it happened, like, everyone denied it occurred, or they said there was a misunderstanding, or it wasn't like that, and then, of course, then she's adamant it actually happened, but unless you can get other people to say, "Yeah, it happened," it's kinda tough.
Yeah, so
Um,
if the kids are so there's compelled speech, but there's also acts are regarded as speech in a lot of circumstances, like the Barnett case I referred to. That was actually not so much about pledging allegiance to the flag; it was actually saluting the flag, arm raised, and that was part of the compelled speech claim. And so, if students are being compelled to act in a certain way, that in essence can be a compelled speech claim. It's almost worse than compelled speech traditionally construed. If you're being compelled, required to actually move around, hop around in circles, and that's more degrading than speech, arguably.
What
But
about like, okay, so this is another thing that happened in that same school. Black Lives Matter in the classroom arrived. This is like a curriculum thing. And now they actually just do it in the classroom. Before they had Black Lives Matter activists going to schools. And so this would be about 3 years ago. They showed up at the school to give a talk to these sixth graders. And then they led them in the no justice, no peace, chant with the fists in the air and everything. And they told the kids to get up and, march around the classroom chanting no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. So every single kid did except for one. One of my daughter's friends refused to do it. She just sat there like this, like, I'm not doing this. Right. And my daughter didn't realize that she had the option to not do it until she saw her friend. So no, she got up. She said she felt terribly uncomfortable and she didn't want to do it, but she got up and she kind of marched around, and then she looked and saw her lone friend sitting there and she felt really guilty. She's like, I didn't have to do this, like, because nothing bad. I mean, to their credit, nothing bad happened to the girl. She stood her ground. But picture like 20 other kids marching around this one lone, like kid just sitting there like, I'm not doing this, which is good. I guess they didn't really force the other kids to do it, but again, in 6th grade, they didn't realize they didn't have to do it.
yeah, well, again, you could argue that they were forced to.
Okay.
And then, like, I was at another parent meeting the other day, and the parent said the kids had to make Black Lives Matter flags.
Yeah, I've heard of that too. Mhm.
And that's compelled speech. Even though you're just weaving, uh, you know, it's so stupid, isn't it?
Yeah.
That also was probably math class.
Right, it is,
And
it's usually math class.
yeah,
Or
but
how
I
about
don't know
talking
that.
about how food deserts, spending all your time in science class to talk about how Publix is a racist grocery store and let's spend a month on food deserts. That was what happened in my daughter's school.
Yeah, but that story you say is also a good metaphor in that there's only ever one person who resists often, and or it's a tiny fraction, and
Yeah.
that you can extrapolate upon that. There's very few parents who want to actually sue. There's very few um, kids who want to go along with a lawsuit. There's very few lawyers who want to bring a claim on this stuff, um, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like that one girl who in sixth grade wouldn't march around in circles. I mean that could be writ large for the whole fight against CRT. There's only a few people who are willing um, to take those steps of resistance, of civil disobedience. But you know what she did, that also, if everyone's looking for a case, particularly public interest firms, they're waiting for a case to the perfect case to fall on their desk. But you can make cases, um, and you can, that girl who didn't march around in the Black Lives Matter Congo line. Um, you know, if she had objected verbally, then maybe she would have been reprimanded, or you know,
Right.
those kids at ASU who sat in the multicultural center with "Don't vote for Biden" T-shirts and police stickers, pro police stickers. That video that went viral.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's an act of civil disobedience. Actually, not really, because they were entitled to be there, but
Right.
it's an affirmative step they took, probably knowing um, shit was going to go down. I guess that
Right.
that
We
was the
don't
case,
know for sure, but I mean,
and
it's the
then
kind of thing,
yeah,
you
so
can almost predict.
you can elicit a case, you can draw a case out by doing something like that, um, or or uh, or doing something as simple as William Clark did, which was saying, "No, I'm not going to answer these questions. No, I'm not going to go back to that class where I'm continually shamed." Um, it can be simpler. It can be as simple as not answering a question.
Right.
And actually, by doing that, you can trigger just by not answering one question. And then if the teacher gives you a point deduction for not answering that question, and the question is legally suspect,
Mhm.
you could have a little viewpoint discrimination claim out of that.
What about when the school goes along with things like, for example, back after the Florida shooting at the Florida school, a lot of schools went along with a walkout for gun control or something, and initially it was supposed to be an act of rebellion on the part of students at different schools that they were just going to walk out of their schools and be absent, I guess, right? And when it happened here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where kids were putting out ads to do it with their parents' help, some of them, the activist parents, on Instagram and things like this. So the superintendent of the district said, you know what, we're just going to facilitate it. We're going to facilitate the walkout. And it became this big planned thing where they were going to, you know, like lead them out of the school like a fire drill, like a massive fire drill, and take up that portion of the school day. And when my daughter told me about it, she said there are posters up in the school, inside the school. There are posters advertising this thing, and they're all anti-gun. And she said, I don't feel like that's fair. I don't feel like it's right. So I went to the principal of her school and I said, okay, you're participating in this whole gun thing. Does my daughter have a right to put up posters that are Second Amendment posters right next to the posters about we got to ban all the guns? And initially he said yes. Like at first he didn't want to, but I challenged him. And I said, I thought you're all about, diversity and everything. He said, okay, yes, she can. So we had a bunch of posters made up, and they were just literally the Second Amendment printed on a poster and a couple of other quotes that were very, from founders and things. And we showed up at this school to put the posters, and he had taken down all the other posters and said, nope, we decided to have no posters. So her posters never saw the light of day. And then when the day arrived, I showed up to record the whole thing. And they literally did. They led the administrators, the teachers, everybody led all the kids out of the building. And kids who didn't want to participate, was a tiny handful, like my daughter, stayed inside the building, but they got no instruction. And I challenged him and I said, I thought that the Supreme Court ruling was, that the students' First Amendment rights didn't stop at the schoolhouse door, right? Like they have First Amendment rights like inside the school, but only if they're not disruptive of instructional time. Because their First Amendment right, I didn't think could take away from the rights of the other students to be there and get the education they were there for. It's not supposed to disrupt the inside of the school. And he's like, well, I don't know anything about that. We're just doing this for safety. And we're just going to, it's only going to be, 10 minutes, whatever. No, it was an entire class period. They all missed. And they were wheeling out kids that were, in wheelchairs. Like the cerebral palsy kids were being wheeled out. And this went on, and it went on every single school in the entire district did this. And I remember thinking, I called the superintendent. I was on the phone with him. I said, how can you do this legally? He said, because I can. Because I am, and I can, and sorry you don't like it. Too bad, so sad. And that was the end of that. And I really didn't know at the time, is that true? That they can just disrupt the entire school day to have a very specific political protest that they participate in that way? It seemed odd to me, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, your school sounds like a mess.
It's Charlotte Mecklenburg schools.
I would like to talk to that cerebral palsy kid.
Wouldn't you?
Imagine if he said he didn't want to be marching, but he didn't have a choice. Someone was just
wheeling him out.
Actually, imagine if he did that. Anyway,
yeah,
so
right.
You could make a nice case out of that.
Right.
But actually, yeah. Well, your daughter, that's a great idea. People should be doing that. They should, if there's a First Amendment, if there's a anti-gun sign in your school, then your kid should think about putting up a pro-gun sign and then see what happens. And you might generate a claim out of that. Also, there might be an absolute riot in the school if you did that, which should also be good. And actually, agitation and civil, that's not even civil disobedience because you have a right to do that, presumably.
Right.
But anyway, agitation or simply speaking what you believe, there should be more of that. And that kind of stuff is going to be what generates cases too.
But you have to be willing, though. You can generate the case, but you kind of have to be willing to follow through on the case. Otherwise, all you're doing is generating backlash against yourself and your kid, right? I mean, or the kid.
Well, you don't know. I think there's a lot of value in just standing up and
just doing it. Okay.
Saying what you believe, and then if you want to take the super erogatory step of filing a federal lawsuit after that, then okay, but you're not obliged to. Mm-hmm. But no, but I think people should have courage to do things like put up that if there's a pro Black Lives Matter sign up, put up an anti-Black Lives Matter sign. Play that game, do that tit for tat, and watch chaos ensue, which you want that to happen. It's better than being silent.
Well, it's a really good point because I think a lot of people think they have to just sit and tolerate it, or they'll say, well, bad things will happen. There'll be a riot. Like you said, people will be fighting. Well, they're doing that anyway. They're finding reasons to fight anyway. They don't like the color of your hat. They don't like the rainbow picture, that the kid drew. The mom I talked to the other day with the picture he was painting wasn't even a rainbow. But no, you got to take that home because that's our flag, that kind of thing. It's happening anyway. And part of the reason I think it's gotten so ridiculous is that people have been too silent for too long. And so many of these kids and administrators seem to feel invulnerable. Like, you can't touch me. You're not going to do anything. You can't say anything. And so
Yeah.
we need some more Rosa Parks out there to say, well, I can and I am. I'm going to put up
Yeah.
my sister.
Or Michael Kohlhaas. Read that one. But
Michael Kohlhaas. I'm like, what is
yeah,
that?
it's one of my favorite books. Anyway, but I mean, there's this question of how much kids really care about all this stuff. They have their iPhones and they're worried about other things. You're only going to find so many kids who are aware and animated by these issues like their parents are. But so there's that too.
Well, is that something? So, well, that's a good point. The kids will say, oh, mom, just let it go. Whatever. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to get through school. But then parents are concerned, um, because they feel like the fact that their child is like that is evidence that the brainwashing and the indoctrination is working, if only to silence their kids and make them subservient to other people. So are there things parents can do, um, if they find out these things are happening to their kids in school, and even if the kid doesn't do something, doesn't to stand up, what can the parent do?
Oh, well, he can make a complaint if the kid's being bullied. Um, you know, um, if you have a shy kid, you shouldn't try to convert him into a social warrior.
Right.
Um, but just I don't know. That's a very general question, but I think there are a number of kids in any group, particularly at the high school age, who will fight back and will resist. So I think they should be given groups. There should be student groups in high schools that can agitate and bring in speakers and not just get the other point across, but also um, do a little guerrilla warfare, like putting up those signs. And
Mhm.
I believe there's an organization that's working on that. Um, but
Well, I
that
bet the schools would say something along the lines of, um, "This is not in keeping with our diversity, equity, and inclusion values, etcetera," which seems, it seems hypocritical because you're like, I want to be included, right? We want to have our speakers. And that would be a case, wouldn't it? So if you go with, on good faith, and like, we have a speaker we want to bring to talk to the kids about these issues. Let's say you want to bring somebody from FAIR or Parents Defending Ed to talk about, whatever. You want to bring Daryl Davis in to have a chat, or Glenn Lowry or something, right? And we already know Paul Rossi wanted to bring people like that, and that was a private school. But still, imagine you have a public school and they tell you no, that could be interpreted as racist. That could be a case, couldn't it? I mean, how can they decide yes to this person and not to that person?
Yeah, I mean, schools
Or I
aren't
don't know.
like colleges. I don't know how the speaker series works for K-12 schools, whether student groups have I mean, if there's a policy in the student handbook about student groups that they're allowed to have speakers come in, then that policy has to be applied equally.
Okay.
And the courts have and should give short shrift to the pretext of it being disruptive. The court's on notice about that being just a pretext to suppress speech. And Well, the courts now, I mean, the courts in 5 or 10 years could be completely different. We could be living in a um, different world, but yeah.
Sure. Well, especially if we don't use the rights we have. Um, no, this talk has been mostly about CRT, but there are other things that are going on in classrooms that I know concern parents that they're wondering, do I have any rights? Like the surveys that have been going on for SEL, where they're asking kids about, gender and sexuality and how much income the parents have and that kind of stuff, or where they have kids in very young grades being exposed to what is objectively pornography, like pornographic pictures and books and, right there in the library or even just in their classrooms. Um, are any of these things, I mean, is the school permitted to do that? I mean, books that you wouldn't like that would be classified as porn and you couldn't sell it to the child at a bookstore. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't be allowed to do that, but they're having it in the school. Like, is that anything or no?
Well, there's that would probably be pretty state law specific. There are states that have laws against exposing kids to pornography or stories that involve sexual excitement if the kids are too young. Wisconsin has a law like that. I'm sure others do. Tennessee just passed a slew of laws this spring related to the instruction of sex ed or sexual subjects generally.
Okay.
And so that I would say look to your state law. But yeah, it's trickier how to derive a federal claim out of that.
Right.
But you could say it violates your fundamental rights as a parent to guide and direct the upbringing of your children, to expose them to, content that you find religiously objectionable. You could make that argument potentially. You could also just send your kid to a psychiatrist. This is what they do in the personal injury world. If you say the kid's injured, or you say you're injured, you go to the right doctor. So you send your kid to child psych if the kid is upset about it, and the child psych, who hopefully is independent of the school, would confirm that yes, indeed, the kid underwent trauma and sexually induced confusion, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
PTSD, make a report, and then you'd have something to work with. So, yeah, there's also, I mean, there's this saying in New York City that if you're in the Bronx, you don't need a case, you just need a plaintiff, and you'll win. If you have a young kid, that's kind of all you need, and you should be able to build a case around that. If you have a kindergartner being exposed to pornographic material or something like that, I mean, maybe talking to a constitutional law scholar at a public interest firm isn't the right kind of lawyer. Maybe you should just talk to the local personal injury lawyer, just thinks creatively about a fact scenario, and he'll make something out of that case. And you see how much press the pornographic materials gets with the recent library stories. So yeah, I mean, you could, if you want, you can build a case out of that.
Okay. And you mentioned before the show that you don't place a lot of stock in PPRA. And I've been covering PPRA and the violations, and I have told people kind of go ahead and file a complaint. But I have also said probably not going to go anywhere, but it does at least kind of start the process. But what do you say to that? It sounds like you have a different thought on it.
Well, I don't think I should tell people not to file PPR
Right.
complaints, but just agency enforcement in general. I mean, how much have we gotten from that recently? I think, do you really expect the Department of Education to withdraw funding from a school district for, um, Mark Zuckerberg's SEL surveys? Do you really expect the Department of Education to do that?
No,
No.
they're not going to. No, of course not.
But then there's also the problem of the PPRA itself. It's sort of like it's written like Swiss cheese. There's lots of holes in it. And For instance, there was a recent guidance from the Department of Education that parents don't have notice rights if the survey is not for marketing purposes, but rather for the purpose of developing educational services and products. So if that's the case, then
And that's different how exactly?
well, I mean,
Yeah.
so if that's the case, then all SEL can be justified as um, falling within that exception
Right.
of being instituted to develop further services and educational products. So what it's tempting to look at PPRA and that list they give. Can't ask about income, can't ask about family relationships, can't ask about mental health without notification, and think you got them. But yeah, I think agency enforcement generally is kind of a weak tool at this point.
Mhm.
And also, the PPRA hasn't been effective in the past. I think, and then if you look at what cudgel they have, I think they just withdraw funding for the particular service surrounding the survey itself. It's
Right.
not like they withdraw all federal funding from the school district. Not like that
Right.
would ever happen.
But some
Um,
of us consider those surveys and the companies behind them to be harmful in themselves. So, the concern that I think the concern I have and a lot of other people have is that the surveys are being used to document what they're going to later twist into climate issues in the school, such that they need to they're trying to turn what's going on with the kids into another problem they can solve. They're trying to sort of psychologize them.
yeah,
And then they're having teachers who are not actually psychologists treat them.
yeah,
And
but
that's, I think, what the concern is, that if the
yeah,
kids participate, the data is collected and then they churn that up to do
yeah.
more damage up in here.
But if you look at the case law and the law review articles on just this question, are teachers practicing psychology without a license? Are the kids guinea pigs? It's not actually a new controversy. It kind of cycles every 5 years. Um, what's new about the current program is just the scale of it, maybe, and the amount of money involved, and then the added just uh, fact of that we're living in some bizarro tech world now, and all information is potentially uh, black gold for a black oil, whatever that phrase is for. It's
Yeah.
valuable for advertisers,
Are they
but
selling it? That's the rumor is they are taking this data and they're selling it to third parties, the data on the kids.
yeah,
Do we know?
and I mean, why else would Zuckerberg be funding Panorama and Castle, whatever he's doing? And they probably aggregate it and sufficiently anonymize it, so then maybe it doesn't break privacy laws, and then maybe they use it. But the other thing, everything you see here, all these hacking stories, and what's safe once that information gets out. And
Sure.
then a lot of these SEL surveys, they're not really anonymous. I've reviewed a lot of them now, and kids are asked to put their student ID on the top. and it's meant to track potentially problematic students. That's why questions are, there always seems to be a gun question. They ask if there's a gun in the house.
Yep.
And then real creepy, what I saw recently are home interventions as best practices recommended by, I think, Panorama, saying that once the student has been identified, put in a certain tier of at risk, then the teacher, his teacher, like homeroom teacher, together with a social worker, should visit the house. I don't know if that's being done, but it's been recommended. But anyway, the reason, back to PPRA.
Get a pit bull. No, okay.
Yeah, back to PPRA. I think what you may have is a constitutional claim rather than a PPRA complaint. And that's why before firing off a PPR complaint on the internet and calling it a day and thinking that you're going to be vindicated in 6 months, maybe you should talk to a lawyer, because the whole survey question, there's circuit splits on that. It's a live issue. It's ripe for maybe Supreme Court review. And circuit split means different court regions around the country have come to different conclusions about how much say parents have on the issue.
So if you got cases, as I understand it, the Supreme Court is more likely to intervene to figure something out. If they start seeing something become, an issue, there's a split circuit, and it's like in all the circuits, this issue has been coming up. That might be something they're gonna review.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court also, as far as I know, hasn't touched the issue of parental rights vis-a-vis schools since 1972 in Wisconsin v. Yoder. I think that's right. So this Supreme Court historically has not wanted to get into the messy subject of parents and schools and people yelling at school boards. It has better things to do. However, what is my however? I forgot what my however was.
Well, this one is, this one is not just strictly like parental rights. This is kind of getting to like civil rights and speech and
right.
Also, kind of
like the other thing with the SEL stuff is it implicates violations of privacy, and then just the fundamental right of a parent to guide and direct the upbringing of the child. That fundamental right is undeveloped, and it's a crazy quilt, and it needs to probably be a little more standardized by a Supreme Court decision. But I remember what my however was. My however was that the Supreme Court probably didn't want to touch the issue of schools and parental rights because of its assumption that school boards are autonomous and democratically elected, and that there's a political solution, or that this is a local issue. But if you look at the reality of how hamstrung local school boards are, so much of curriculum policy now is by fiat, either with Common Core at the federal level. Before that, No Child Left Behind, and more recently, with all the CRT and SEL guidance that's attached to ESSA funding for COVID relief. And it's not, school boards don't really have that much freedom to accept or reject curriculum,
right,
as maybe they did 20 or 30 years ago. So I think the Supreme Court is is or was working off a false assumption that school boards are autonomous, sovereign, and local. Which I
Well,
don't
there are a
think.
lot of parents laboring under that
Yeah.
also false assumption, as you can see if you just spend any time on YouTube, when you see them writing speeches and getting up, and I mean, some of them are wonderful speeches and they say some great things. They're just saying them to people who really don't have that authority to change the curriculum. They just don't. Also, most of the case law as far as schools and curriculum, public schools and curriculum goes, is such that if they're not teaching you something, if in other words, if they're not restricting your free speech to respond to the curriculum, they can teach you just about anything. I mean, the state has a pretty wide latitude to teach you whatever it feels like, whatever it
Well,
wants
that's
to.
why that's why Gabrielle Clark's lawsuit's important, because that was the assumption when we brought the lawsuit, was that you can't break that 40-year wall in case law, particularly in the Ninth Circuit,
Mhm.
that says the school has almost complete discretion over curriculum.
Right.
And but just the stuff has gotten so bad now. And also,
Yeah, they can't really violate the Civil Rights Amendment while they're doing it. That's, like
yeah.
they've gotten they're they're doing that, but if they're violating the Bill of Rights or they're violating the Civil Rights, there's certain things that they are taking a chance. And some of the verbiage, some of the activities, they're segregating, they're resegregating students. They're having students go like, all the black students over here and all the white students over here, and they're doing things within the classroom that I like to believe the court would be interested to hear about.
Well, I don't think agencies are interested in getting involved.
No.
And like I think I heard a statistic on I think like 42% of universities now have some sort of segregated housing.
Yep.
So if segregated housing and segregated education services is so patently illegal, then where has the Office of Civil Rights been? Obviously, they have no will to enforce that, or people have no will to make complaints about it. So, I mean, when you start getting that critical mass where 42% of schools are doing it,
Right.
I mean, it almost doesn't matter anymore whether it's whether it's legal or illegal. You're not pushing back that tide, which I think the left knows that if they can make enough practical inroads, and if they can institutionalize this stuff sufficiently,
Hmm.
a few isolated adverse court decisions aren't going to roll that back. And then courts don't like to um, disturb reality too much anyway. So if the majority or almost majority of schools have segregated housing, and the court looks at that, and they're going to be much more reluctant to
Right.
disturb it. So,
Somebody asked this question. It's just kind of interesting. I hear this a lot. If school boards have no authority, why don't they just make announcement clearly to tell the parents to make the speeches to those who do have the authority? I honestly don't know the answer. Why they don't just say you're talking to the wrong people. Well, first of all, we don't know that they don't. I mean, we see videos that show like little segments, but I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Do you have a theory as to why they don't just say you're barking up the wrong tree and you're taking up our meeting time? I mean, they have shut down public comment in many cases.
well, I don't mean that school boards don't have any authority. If I
Well,
said that, I
no,
mean they.
I've said that. I've said that because
Yeah.
I looked it up. And in this country, as far as curriculum goes, there are two states where local school boards have any say at all in choosing curriculum, and that's Vermont and Connecticut. The rest of the district school boards at the at the low level do not concern themselves with curriculum. It's handed down from the state board of ed. So all they do is make sure that the curriculum materials or the curriculum that's chosen by the district is in alignment with what the state has decreed. So if somebody brings like books or materials and they just pay for it, they're like, what do you need for your budget? And then if somebody complains, the only way they evaluate it is, does this align with the state standards? And if it can be reasonably construed to align with the state standards, they wash their hands of it. They're like, okay, it aligns with state standards. We can't do anything else about it. That's the most they can say. It does or doesn't align with state
Yeah.
standards. So,
Well, yeah, but the other thing is maybe all this happened because conservatives sort of ceded the field of and washed their hands of public education, at least influential conservatives, because if you have money and you're a conservative, you're sending your kid to private school and writing off public school as a lost cause. That's been a trope for the right, at least the upper set of the right, for a long time. So no wonder this happened. And that's sad and a dereliction of duty. And but I think that's the case. The movers and the shakers on the right, they send their kids to private schools and always have.
but they did send their kids also to private colleges, just like everybody else. The movers and the shakers on the left did as well. And this is a top down, this has come from the universities. They're the ones who design all the pedagogy. And like everybody else, they have to publish or perish. So what is there new to say about education, about pedagogy? You're just starting to make stuff up, right, to get tenure. So you publish, you do the pseudo research, and then that filters down into teachers' colleges. Now they teach the teachers all this gibberish, and then the teachers go into the school. So in other words, there were both right and left were sending their kids to Harvard. Both right and left were sending their kids to Columbia. Both right and left were, for a long, long time. These are the best schools to get into, right? The Ivy League. But what I think you're correct in one sense that politically, the political right wasn't, kind of like wasn't paying attention or was not focused on how much of that was happening. It's like they just didn't even dial into what was going on. And, like you said, because they thought K to 12, it's not going to affect my kids, so I'm not going to worry about it. They
Yeah, I think
forgot that it was going to affect them when they got to college.
there was a lot of that, just not paying attention. And then because a lot of this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff started being implemented in 2015, 2016. And you see that in Loudoun County, you see that elsewhere. And then, Rufo came along, a couple months ago. So that probably shouldn't be how it works. People should be a little more attentive to what's going on.
Right.
But whatever. I think conservatives and white people generally are learning that they have to adopt a minority mindset. And that means, doing what minorities traditionally have done, which is, suing, taking to the streets, getting active, staying loud. I don't know. You can't just ignore the issues anymore.
That's an interesting way to put it. Take it on a more minority mindset.
Yeah, or a Jewish one, because Jews are actually, in my experience, they get it. Like they just have a good sense for danger, and they're always looking over their shoulder because of their history. And so, people who look like you and me need to do that too now.
I'm Jewish, actually.
Oh.
That's so funny.
Oh.
Yeah, but no, it's true. It's true though, but I've heard from a lot of people that Jews in America, they're usually so far left, they're progressive, traditionally, not my family, but we're weird. But I don't know that they're catching on to the danger. Some are, certainly some. The closer they are to their immigrant roots, the more they sense the danger. The longer they've been in the United States, the more assimilated, the less they sense it, the more they think it's hyperbolic to talk about it. You've got the head of the ADL who's like, oh, this is nothing. It's totally fine. And I'm thinking, what? It's not totally fine. So it's but I like the way you've put that, though, that you have to adopt a minority mindset and recognize that in terms of point of view, people who are opposed to this right now, while probably not the literal minority in terms of numbers, in terms of attitudes and so forth, but I think in terms of how willing they are to be vocal, and in terms of power, definitely in terms of power, people who disagree with this do not have the power right now. Every institution is captured. Would you agree with that? Media, politics, education. This is the point of view of those institutions, that CRT is good.
Yeah, captured, or there should be all these institutions that they're not captured, but they're too pathetic and cowardly to do anything about it, like the Catholic Church.
Uh-huh.
They're pathetic. I'm Catholic, like absolutely pathetic on the mask stuff, on the CRT stuff. They're just silent on
Well, you saw what
everything.
the mayor, or not the mayor, the governor of New York was saying, right?
What?
Which she said, there's no religious exemption to the, because all the leaders of all the major religions, the leaders of all the organized religions, she said, not the disorganized ones, but the leaders of all the organized religions say that there's no religious exemption, therefore there's no religious exemption. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, with the exception of the Catholic Church, there's no such thing as a leader of the Jewish faith. There's no such thing as a leader of the Protestant faith. There is no such thing as a leader. There is the Pope, and we know how he feels about it, right? He's closed the Vatican to anybody who hasn't had it. But all the other faiths, there is no one leader. There isn't one. So she's standing up and saying, nope, there's no such thing as a religious exemption. You have to get it.
Yeah. Well,
That's where they're at now.
Well, that's where, that's where everything's at right now. I mean, arguably, all these parent groups that were animated about CRT, none of them are talking about it anymore so much. I mean, it's kind of like there's Twitter and there's Facebook. Twitter is still preoccupied with CRT, but if you go down to Facebook, it's all masks among the moms groups, 100%.
Yeah.
And you sound tone deaf if you bring up anything about CRT.
Right.
So, and maybe that was planned. I bet it was, because actually the mask stuff, pro-mask and pro-vax polls better than pro-CRT. So I wonder if that was planned. But anyway,
probably. I mean, I know they put together materials. The teachers unions put together materials to send out to parents and teachers who were pro CRT of how to handle the critics. And looking at it, they gave them talking points. They gave them all this. So, I mean, they're very well organized.
Yeah, well, the best way to handle it is to change the subject, which they did. So, anyway, but yeah.
What do you think is the best? Is the best method to deal with this to just leave, to disengage, if you can? Like, take your kid out of the school?
Then they're gonna come for you wherever you retreated to in like 5 or 10 years. And charter schools, a lot of them are completely woke, like private schools. And also, if they sense that their political opposition has retreated and concentrated in one area, whether it's charter schools, home schools, then they're going to come after those redoubts, and they're going to come for you there in 5-10 years. And then I mean, frankly, I think this sounds weird, but instead of retreating from public schools, people should be returning their kids to public schools. If everybody had to go to public school, this might not have happened. And if everyone influential with money, the leaders of the big conservative think tanks and everyone on down, and all the politicians, and all the Wall Street types, if they all had to send their kids to public school, this probably never would have happened. But now we're in a case where public school is only for the people of modest means or less, and they don't have much say on the right or the left. So,
well, that's interesting because I think back, to when I was a kid and I went to public school through ninth grade in New Jersey. And, it was supposed to be good schools or whatever, but they were crap. I mean, they're even back then, in my opinion, public schools just weren't as good, because then I went to private school after that. And just in terms of the academics, because they have to serve everybody. They have to have this, and what I noticed even in my time, both when I was a student and then when I went back to teach in public schools. So 1990, I went in to teach in the public schools in the Chicago area, but not right smack dab in Chicago. I was in Winnetka. I was in a suburb. And even then, the degradation of the curriculum, the dumbing down, if you will, was so pronounced that one might say, well, if they had to send their kids there, well, they did have to send their kids. They chose, because of whether it was means or not, they chose to put their kids somewhere else because it had started long before now. Long before now, it started where the curriculum was not rigorous. It was being influenced by the universities with a lot of, sort of communist ideas, and people didn't want it for their children. And I can empathize with that because I have 3 kids, and I saw what it did to my children. I saw what it was doing to them psychologically. I saw, it's, in other words, if we all put our kids back in the schools today, we can't get away from the fact that the teachers who are there are not going to be replaced anytime soon. They're know nothings. They don't know anything except this ideology, and they're actively abusing children. So when I had to by law send my kids to the public school because I was in a divorce situation, and my ex-husband was like, they're going in the public school whether you like it or not. And guess what? The court agreed, even though they'd been homeschooled. Court was anti-homeschool, put them in the school. And every day I took them there, they were crying. They were like, can we please go back to homeschool? Yeah, I felt like a child abuser, but I was going to go to jail if I didn't do it. So with people who have a choice, literally have a choice, no judge is going, you must do this. If I'd had that choice, I don't know how I could have lived with myself not to avail myself of it, because I saw what it was doing to them psychologically. They all 3 ended up with different issues because of what was being done to them in the school that I couldn't stop. I went to the school. I wrote letters to the school. I talked to the teachers. You can't be involved enough. It doesn't work. So I'm sympathetic and empathetic to the people who want to leave. I get your point, but I just don't know that would really do anything in time to help these children. That's what worries me is the children, the actual human beings who are stuck in there,
well, yeah. I mean, I don't have any kids. What am I talking about?
No, I mean, I see your point, and I think your point is valid in terms of that by leaving and not being there, we did sort of seed the battlefield, if you will. It was already geared towards that direction, and we just literally walked off the battlefield decades ago and said, have at it, except for one problem. The have at it became the population. That's the population of people who make up the middle class, the majority of the working class. Like, every immigrant coming in has to go to these schools. That's what's there for them. And I don't think anybody thought about it. I agree with you there, that I do not think that conservative thinkers and people in any kind of power at the time stopped to think about what will the consequences be, and what should our leadership and involvement be, even if we personally don't want our kids there. And I don't think they did that. So I agree with your point overall. I just don't know if I feel comfortable telling people like, go back to the schools, at this point. It doesn't
Yeah,
feel
but I
right.
mean, it kind of neutralizes the force of your anti-CRT in public schools position, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think, well, just get your kids out of there. How do you say that at the same time as um, there shouldn't be CRTs in the public schools, or like it just seems like you have more standing to make change if your kids are there. Um,
Well, there's always the money question. So in
yeah,
other words, until the money is following the kids when they leave, like literally following them, you still have standing in that you're still paying for it. So even though your child's physical body is not there and they're not having to listen to it, which you could argue is for their own protection, I think it strengthens your argument if you've made sacrifices, financial sacrifices or physical, like career sacrifices to protect your child for something you think is so bad. I think it actually weakens the argument if you keep sending your kid in. It's like when the parent who's married to an abuser and the kid's still there and you and the kid are still there. And it's like, well, you stayed. Like, how abusive could they be? You stayed, right? There's always that like blame the victim thing. So I feel somewhat the same way. It's like, well, it was so bad you stayed. It was so bad your kid goes every day. You drop them off and say, bye, honey, I'll see you in 8 hours. It doesn't really have the same weight as I had to take on 3 jobs. I've had to hire a college kid to watch my kid. I've moved in with my mom, like whatever you had to do, even though you've collected my taxes and are still paying, I'm still paying for this. But I don't want my kid abused. And like you said, I took him to a shrink or I took him to a doctor and they have anxiety disorder. And we had to do this because of the anguish of being in the school with this racist garbage. It seems to me that if you had to go through that, it's a little more real than if you're like still sending them.
yeah,
It's like, how bad could it be? I
yeah.
don't know. I've actually had people say that to me when I said my kids were in a charter school and I was complaining about it, 5, 6 years ago. And they were like, well, then why are they still there? It was so bad. Why are they still there? I'm like, well, and then I have to go explain the whole, judges don't like homeschooling and I'm divorced. What am I supposed to do? You
Yeah.
know? So but I mean, it's a tough thing. I think what I'm taking away from this is, and tell me if I'm wrong, we think more like a minority, get more active for your own, for your own interests, make cases, civil disobedience. Don't, say no to things, if there's compelled speech, say no. If there's surveys, say no. If, your kid is asked to tell your kid to say no. If they're putting up posters for Black Lives Matter, put up anti-Black Lives Matter. If they're wearing, Che Guevara t-shirts, wear a Donald Trump t-shirt. Whatever the case may be, like, meet it head to head and exercise your rights and come what may.
Well,
Whatever
and
happens,
do
happens.
I think the best thing you can do is do right to know requests, FOIA requests. You don't even have to be from the district to do that. You don't even have to be from the state to do that.
Okay.
And all it is an email to the school district's record officer. It doesn't even have to have a letterhead or anything. You can just say, hello, I would like this, and this. Every parent group should be doing that. And that has all sorts of happy unintended consequences. I know I have seen a lot of stories now where FOIA requests, which were intended to just find out what they're teaching, results in the resignation of multiple board members because those FOIA requests turns out it brings out communications between the board members and the consultants, and it just shows rank nepotism, conflict of interest. I saw that happen just in the last 2 weeks with people I visited. And then whole school board resignations. And that wasn't even the intention of the right to know requests. So you never know. That's really powerful as long as you stay on it. And it's not that hard to do. So
Now, what should they be asking when you say, asking for this, and this? What kind of this, and this would be good to put in a FOIA request? Specifics about
well,
curriculum or about surveys or both? Or
yeah, the issue I'm into now is equity committees, which advise on the curriculum. and so there's ask about the equity committee, ask about the identity of the members, the process of formation of the equity committee, the selection process, and all communications among board members using the word equity committee.
Okay.
And just make that one sentence. And then ask for if you can identify, or if you can't identify the DEI consultant snooping around in your, changing everything in your school, ask for all communications between district employees and the named DEI consultant. And that's going to reveal all sorts of stuff. Ask for all communications between the school board and the state school board association. The state school board association, in addition to the union and the DEI consultant, is one of the big pushers of this stuff. Nobody talks about that much. Also,
yeah, I've mentioned it on the channel before,
okay,
that
good.
because every state requires the school boards to take training from the state school board association, and that's where they stick it in.
And they're supplying a lot of the materials, whether it's an equity pledge that the school board reads, whether it's the idea of the equity committee in the first place or the selection process. It's often them.
Right.
So if you can get those communications, just anything.
The one in Pennsylvania is particularly bad. Of the ones I've looked at, they have a whole equity plan, and it is so detailed, and that's where it's all coming from in the state of Pennsylvania, is the school board association.
Well, yeah, but that's where all my stories come of how fruitful these right to knows have been. Right to know is FOIA in PA, and I mean, I heard a lot of resignations recently just from FOIAs, and the bad guys that have resigned, and just rank conflict of interest, profiteering between school board members and DEI consultants, money going back and forth. And the time to do right to knows and FOIAs is now, because they weren't expecting to get bombarded by FOIAs and right to knows. Now they're on notice, but for the last year and two, they were just emailing away with impunity. And so you find the time to do that is now.
That's great. And I know, I had Nicole Solis on the other day, and she had that situation where they were talking about suing her. I think it was an intimidation tactic, but then the union actually did sue her because they claimed, if these FOIA requests came out, teachers were going to be harassed and all kinds of garbage claims. But I think she filed a suit with a counterclaim against them for all kinds of things that they've done. So she's taken it to the mattresses with them, which I think is great. But not everybody has. I mean, she's a lawyer, so it's a little. She knows what she's doing. But I love this idea.
In the school board's defense, I think she did file like 600.
Right.
I'm just teasing, but she.
It was a lot.
She did file a lot. You don't need to file 600. Just to cut, I would say 6, maybe 6, 5 really well phrased, pointed ones. Get the ball rolling.
Right.
You don't need to do 600.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I get that, but I think what she said was that she was hoping.
I'm kind of teasing.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, they're you don't know which ones, they're going to say they have information on. And so it's kind of like trying to be super precise so they can't squeak through on, you didn't word it exactly the right way.
Well, ask for metadata. If you're asking for email communications, ask for including metadata, and that captures the attachments to the emails. There's little tricks like that. Otherwise, they'll give it to you without the attachments.
And that's where the bad stuff lives.
And then you got to do another one. So that kind of stuff.
Okay. What are some tips on how to find an attorney that will actually talk to you about any of this? Because I've heard stories where people are like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Well, you can talk to me. Uh,
Okay, guys, you hear that? You can talk to Jon.
I'm very good. I teamed up with David Pifterak, and we're at the CRTattorney.com. There are a number of public interest firms that would eat their young for the right kind of case, like a nice fat First Amendment case involving a young kid and a mom.
Right.
They would buy you a Corvette, and they would do anything. There's a couple firms like that, and you can go to them. And
There you go, guys.
there's just I don't know. It's a more acceptable field to be in now. But local attorneys are really valuable for right to knows, contract stuff, because all this stuff has to deal with local contract law too.
Mhm.
It's a DEI contract with the curriculum vendor. So local attorneys are going to be good for that, and also any FOIA stuff, get them for that. And they're just getting involved in that anyway, because local attorneys have kids in these schools, and so that I would talk to your local attorney too. There's a lot of options. You know the drill.
Right.
There's Goldwater Institute. There's ADF. There's Southern Legal Foundation. There's Mountain States Legal Foundation. There's Pacific Legal. You call them. There's they get inundated with stuff.
Right.
They're free though, ideally.
Yeah.
There's a casting couch interview. You got to look the right way, and sound the right way, and the donor's got to like you, and then all goes well, they'll take you on. But if you have a young kid too, and it's a really bad story, just any local personal injury attorney probably take that case.
Right.
Because
right.
you can make money off these cases.
Okay. Well, that is, I mean, these are great ideas. I mean, I think a lot of people I've been speaking out against, I shouldn't say against. It's not been against going to school boards. It's been more like refocus to things that are more practical, and it's been great for raising awareness, but as you pointed out, as soon as they changed the subject to masks, it was like done. We had our big screaming fit about CRT, and then it was masks, and like nothing actually changed. Nothing really happened. They're still doing it. It's still, in the schools right now. Kids are back in the school. They're doing privilege walks in North Carolina. I mean, it's like, so if you really want to have an impact, then you've got to do different things, is kind of the argument I've been making. And I think you've given us some ideas of what are some of those different things that you can do to make a difference. I also think to make a difference right where you are. So in other words, trying to go up to the state board of ed is going to be, forget about it, right? You have to do things like that are going to focus right in your district, right in your school. And these FOIA requests, I think, would do that, as well as some of these other type of actions that you could bring. And at a minimum, maybe you just get the harassment to stop for your kid. And isn't that the goal, right? And if you do it and a bunch of other people do it, and it starts becoming, like you said, if you start doing the things that they didn't do because everybody just left the school, and maybe it actually will start to change. The teachers will start saying, I don't have time for this drama, and I don't want to do this anymore. And then the teachers might start pushing back. The few good teachers who are still in the system might start speaking out more and take over from the crazy teachers. because they're not all that way. Not every single teacher in every single school is all bought in on this, and they're just very quiet. But if they start seeing parents
Yeah.
saying, I'm not tolerating this anymore, then maybe they'll feel empowered to stick up for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, rich people should run for, rich conservatives should run for school board elections and help finance it themselves. And then the people in the best position are these mothers groups like Moms for Liberty or No Left Turn. I mean, they already got the organization in place. They're already on the ground. They just need some guidance and some money, which I think they're working on. But some of those groups they should be getting money from donors because they're doing good work and they don't have any money, but they're in the best position to act in various ways.
Why do you think so many moneyed interests, so many of these like progressive moneyed interests are so interested in completely destroying our school system? Like they've got to know, people like Mark Zuckerberg, who, was obviously not a stupid guy. Like he's got to know that having a generation of kids who are completely ignorant and racist and tearing each other apart is not going to even be good long term for his business, is it? How's this good long term for anybody's business?
Well, I don't know. I think it's the more interesting question is, why isn't more conservative money being put towards this? I mean, Rufo did what he did on a shoestring budget and Twitter.
Right.
And then, there's only a handful of lawsuits. So, I don't think conservative money is very smart or mobile. Okay. Probably because they're scared of IRS scrutiny. But I don't think it's getting to the right places. I think these mom groups should get funding. If they're not already, I don't think they have much money to work with. But
I just wonder where all these rich conservatives are. Like, where'd they go? I got to be out there. Like, I don't know. I don't understand it. But hopefully people will take what you've said.
It's going to conferences. Conservative money goes towards conferences. Like, conservatives love conferences, catered conferences on natural law, and things like that. That's my guess.
Interesting. Yeah, like where even some of the think tanks, like where's John Locke Foundation?
Yeah, like it goes to think tanks, which are just employment agencies, and it goes to conferences, and it doesn't go towards, there's just not we're not like the left. We don't have a system for dealing with this, a legal campaign or grassroots campaign, I guess.
Well, that needs to change. So those of you who are listening and hearing this, and I know there are a fair number of people who are really opposed to CRT who are actually not conservative, but they're opposed to it. In other words, they're more like, center right, center left leaning, that kind of thing. They're not hard left, and they're very vocal against it. But, there's not an organization for that either. It's like whatever there is for the right is over here, and whatever there is for the left has always been in existence, very well organized and well funded. And the rest of us, the politically homeless or whatever, we're kind of like,
Yeah.
So anyway, I really appreciate you spending the time to help explain this to us, because I haven't known what to say to people, and I get emails all the time. Where should I go? What should I do? And I think this answered a lot of questions. I hope the audience now feels like they have a little list of things they can do and will do them. And if anybody's watching or listening who's a rich conservative, please start funding these groups, Moms for Liberty, etc. And, get the ball rolling. They need money. This all takes money to happen. I know even Gabrielle needs money. So, she's got a great case, but it takes money to take it all the way. So
I think Gabrielle needs a talk show, but that's another.
I would have to agree with you.
I think she should have a daytime talk show. But that's story for another day.
She absolutely should. She was on the she was on the panel I did on growing up tomboy, and she was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. So I think she would do great as a talk show host. So, my friend Philip over here, your pal, he says, define rich. How rich are we talking here? When you're saying like rich conservatives, how much money are we talking about? You know?
You want me to answer that question?
Yeah, I do. I would like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking Koch brothers rich? Are we talking, how rich here? Billionaires, millionaires.
I don't know.
Anyone.
Yeah.
Anybody who has any money, start donating. It's going to cost money. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jon. I really appreciate your spending the time tonight. Thanks to everybody watching. If you know people who could benefit from this information, please pass it along. The replay will be up immediately if you're watching on the replay. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And have a good evening, everybody.